So basically, Iran was a very insulated because of Ottoman Empire. It was very insulated from the European continent. Um, Essentially, what happened before the Safavid, it was the Venetians that went there and they basically secured the first monopoly of trading silk. After that, it was the Portuguese that went into the Persian Gulf, and they actually um, set up forts in the Strait of Hormuz, which is now subject of debate and whether US is going to control it or Iran is going to close it. It's now coming back up. That area was controlled by the Portuguese, and it was a Safavid. Essentially, they didn't have a navy, so they had to rely on the British in order to put the Portuguese out. And British, happily, being a rising power, lend their navy to Iran, the Iranian King Shah Abbas. And essentially, after that, the British were driven out because of the Turkish. There was a Turkish alliance. There was an alliance between the Ottoman. It was a detente between the Ottomans and the Safavid Persia. They would go to war, and they would, kind of like the Soviet Union and United States, they would go to war and they would actually make peace. And it was during the peacetime that basically the British were driven out from Iran. And this is about 300 years ago. The last war that Iran engaged in, which was against India. And this is the time, essentially, the end of the Mughal Empire in India, and the British became the winners of it, because the Iranians went in, they looted the Delhi, and they got out. And the Mughal Empire after that was so weakened that the British moved in, they eliminated, and they began colonizing Britain outright. Before that, it was just certain companies. Moving closer to the Qajar area is essentially when the Great Game began. The British controlled India. They wanted to protect India from the advancement of Russian czars. So what they did was basically they had this policy of creating this protective zone against the Russians. So they started engaging the Iranian monarchy, the Qajars, and they basically secured rights in the southern part, which basically entailed some economic rights, entailed the rights of flag. So the Iranian citizens, subjects of the king, who had the British flag in the southern zone, would not be subject to the scrutiny by the government. So from then on, this is when the certain interests, the local interests, business interests, began relying on the religious figures to rally the people against this monopoly practices. One of the examples is basically one of the Qajar kings, in order to finance his trip to Europe, they gave the rights monopoly of trading of tobacco. So growth, sales, and export of tobacco would be controlled by the Britain under this monopoly, under this special concession given to the British. And what happened was the local interest essentially went to one of the religious figures. His name is Mirza Reza Shirazi, and he essentially declared a fatwa that use of tobacco is haram until this is repealed. So use of tobacco is forbidden religiously, is a sin, until this monopoly is in power. So this is one of the instances of progressive, what I call progressive use of religion, in order to stand against what I call imperialist practice, monopolizing practice. And it was during this time that basically, it was after this time that the Oh, one more thing. The religious versus non-religious education system is essentially what was introduced much later on. Before, at this time, only educational possibility for the upper class of Iran was going to what is called Hawza, which is madrasa, or like essentially it's like you go there to read, write, learn how to read and write, do mathematics, do philosophy, but it's essentially organized in along the lines of religious. Religion is a big part of it. So the people who become clergymen go through this system. Before this, there was no secular religion, secular education system. So. And what happens is like essentially, like these guys operated much like lawyers do. So in business disputes, they would go to the clergyman of the bazaar, and they would settle the dispute between businessmen, and that's how they made most of their money. Like basically, you hire just like you hire a lawyer, they hire the clergyman to do their business. They don't hire him; they just pay him to resolve the conflict. It's like it's the constitutional revolution, which another thing. Major intellectual routes to Iran were the Caucasus, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. That was the major way that Iranians began to know about like for example socialism, Marxism, and all this came to Iran from Russia, and it was basically Iranian migrant workers going to that Caucasus area to work, and they basically got organized. It's actually the Russian Social Democratic Party, which produced Kerensky, was a major organizing force over there. And then there was Cairo and Istanbul, which also kept some of the religious debate between the Sunni and Shiites. They had it going between these two. Like a lot of oppositional newspapers at the time of Constitutional Revolution, which is 1907, were printed clandestinely in those cities and brought illegally to Iran. And the Constitutional Revolution is essentially it was an uprising based on that wanted to impose a constitution on Iran. It's the movement that produced the parliamentary system of Iran, the parliament, which is called Majlis. And at the beginning, the king at the time was backed by the Russians. He was very close to the Russian Tsars. So he put down the first Majlis, and he executed major leaders of it, and he drove off. He was driven out by the uprising that basically reinstated Majlis. But during this uprising, there was there was two tendencies within this movement that threw off the king and basically re-established the Majlis. One was that more European-minded, which wanted to basically import the Belgian-style constitution. Belgium was very much the model at the time. Like Belgian constitution was the model that they wanted to do in Iran, also in Egypt. They wanted to do something. The Young Turks wanted to do it in Ottoman Empire. So that was one tendency, and the other tendency was the tendency which is basically they wanted to have a mashruta, which is religious conditionality. Mashruta means conditionality, and basically they wanted to mix. It's the beginning of the religious modernity of Iran, which basically wanted to say, no, we don't want to get rid of the religion influences in the politics, and it's obviously was supported by the business elite in the bazaar, who were afraid of this westernization, this new model, of importing stuff from the West. Okay, let me know if I'm talking. Yes.
Could you put some years on this?
This is 1907. This is the Constitutional Revolution, and from then on, essentially reflecting the great power, the great struggle between the Russians and the English. Two camps developed, and two oppositional camps in each side of it. So in the north, you have this monopoly by the Russians on, like for example, porting, fishing in Caspian Sea, oil drilling, and the opposition to that was connected to the opposition within Russia. And in the south, you have the reverse of it. You have this religious opposition to the British imperialism, and from there on, you see this disconnect between the northern part of Iran and the southern part of Iran. And this is the time that the British and the Russians divide Iran in half, and if the Shah of Iran, if the king wanted to go to the south, he had to get permission from the local power. And at the end of Qajar, essentially Qajars were very weak. The last king was a child, so he couldn't put down the turmoil, what is called turmoil, which is essentially the local people uprising against the central government. You have the Lower uprising, you have the communist uprising, which is actually mentioned by Rosa Luxemburg in her newspaper, Mirza Kuchak Khan. It was a northern uprising in support of the Bolshevik revolution, very much connected to the Bolsheviks, and they got help from they got advisors from the Russian Bolshevik party. And what happened was, like, the British helped the first king of Pahlavi, which is the last dynasty. They essentially organized a coup. They put him in contact with the other contacts they had, like his name is Reza Khan, Reza Shah, for the people who support the monarchy, Reza Shah. And he essentially came to power by a military invasion of Tehran, put the last king of Qajars out of business, let's say, and he declared himself to be the king. And for a lot of Iranians...
What year was that?
This is 1921. 1920 to 1921. And what essentially Reza Shah is seen by a lot of by some Iranians as a modernizer. He's the person who basically brought in the state model into Iran. Before then, Iran was operated on Millat system, which also operated in Ottoman Empire, which basically is local rulers who basically exploit the local population, and whatever they take some, and then they send the surplus or like the money made to the king. So Iran was funded very much like that, no taxation as we understand it currently. So Reza Shah is basically the guy who built the modern army of Iran, and he used it very efficiently to put down the revolts against him. He he modernized the post system. He introduced the university system, the Western style of education into Iran. But at the same time, he is the person who actually removed the veil. Forceful removal of veils in Iran happened under him. He basically sent police, and any woman that was wearing veil, they forcibly removed the veil from them in public, which is, for some people, they see it as liberation of women, but at the same time, it's forceful. Let's not forget that it was against the will of the people, and it was enforced very brutally. He's the person who basically wanted to play wanted to make Iran okay. He wanted to make Iran follow the path of the Turkish model, the Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's model. Ataturk's model, and he was very forceful in that. And at the end of his dynasty, this is World War II, beginning of. like leading up to World War II. He was trying to distance himself from the British, and what he did essentially is like he began relying on the German advisors. So the Germans move in, British get really naturally they get really worried that there's Nazi advisors in Iran. There's a pan-Iranist movement, which is basically it's a fascist movement that comes out of it. And the British invade Iran from the south, the Russian Red Army from the north. They remove him, they put his son, which is very young. He grew up in Switzerland most of his life. He was educated over there. He was very weak figure because the father was a very strong man, a very strong figure, and by contrast his son was much weaker. And they put him in power. They ship off the Reza Khan to exile. And it is during this time, because there is a weak king, there is two opposite polar ideological poles in the country, that you see the beginning of a very vibrant dialogue, very vibrant contestation for power and popular support. You have the Tudeh party, which is a communist party of Iran, formed initially very independent of the Soviet Union. It is basically during this time that is being they officially engaged the oil workers in the south. And oh yes, I forgot this, the oil concessions. The oil concessions of 1919 and basically gives the British the right to develop Iranian oil in partnership with the Iranian government on for 100 years. On 75 to 25%, 75 to British Anglo-Persian oil company, and 25% to Iranian government. But at the same time, Iranian government is responsible for paying for building it too, so that 25% is further cut. It is that's passed under Reza Shah in 1919 actually, and Reza Shah keeps that in power. Keeps that in effect. So we move to the post-World War II time. The Americans are also deploy some troops over there. The young king, Mohammad Reza Shah, which is the last king. I just call him the Shah from now on because that is what Americans refer to him. He's not the only Shah of Iran, he's the last one. But seeing that the British are they're getting weaker and being very much afraid of the USSR and its influence in Iran, Shah decides to become closer and closer to the Americans. So as a favor, for example, he buys all the American equipment after World War II, all the army surplus stuff basically. And that's just one example. And he begins sending the Iranian students instead of France and England to United States. So this is the beginning of development of Iranian-American relationship. And up until now, the view of the United States in Iran is very positive. There was it's seen as an anti-imperialist country, anti-colonial country, because US wanted to get involved in the colonial game. So it basically put down the British, French, Portuguese. It did not support their colonial movements outright. At the same time, there was an incident, which is the Schuster incident, which goes way back, which Iranian government hires an American guy to do audit, and they basically audit the people very close to the British and the Russians, and through their pressure, he gets out, and he becomes kind of an Iranian friendly hero figure in Iran.
So what did he do?
His name is Schuster. He was auditing. He was auditing.
W. Morgan Schuster.
His name is Morgan Schuster, and he was basically auditing. He became a head of treasury in Iran, and he was auditing the accounts of the people who were not paying taxes, and these people were basically close to American, British, and the Russians. So he was pushed out. So we come to 1950s, and there's a in part because following the other developments in the third world, Iranians begin to talk about nationalizing the oil, and at first they want to nationalize oil on 50-50 level. This is Mossadegh's initial plan was 50-50. British refused it outright. And at the same time, you have the Tudeh party, which at this time is very popular because they developed kind of workers' bill of rights, which introduced that Friday day off, 8-day work week, which is very revolutionary for the Middle East, and there is no worker-friendly movement up until this point in Middle East. So Tudeh becomes very close to the Russians, and they basically become a lobbying force for the Russians to get the right to develop oil fields in the north. Mossadegh refuses that outright. So this is, you hear sometimes that Mossadegh was communist friendly. Mossadegh was very weary of the Bolshevik, the USSR, and essentially as a rebuttal he says to the Russians that, you know, we had a very good view of the USSR because of the Lenin's exposure of the secret treaties. But at the same time, we're not going to give the rights to the Russian oil fields, to the Russia to develop the northern oil fields. In 1953, most of it's common knowledge now, but 1953, essentially the British, through their contacts in the bazaar and in the religious institution, as a person, his name is Kashani, they instigate a coup, and the Americans essentially use another contact religious man, his name is Behbahani, and they use these two against Mossadegh, which initially they were in the same league with, to overthrow this guy through use like paying thugs in the streets to basically go and break windows in the name of Communist Party and shout slogans of the Tudeh party, and basically they manufacture, they put on a show that the communists are taking over and Mossadegh is supporting them, which essentially was a show financed by the American dollars and British pound. And at this point is the time that we have a secret police, which his name is Savak, and the guy, the model is basically developed by the CIA and helped along later on by Mossad, which Iran developed a relationship with, but unspoken relationship. Iran would sell oil to Israel. Iran would basically invite Israeli military officers without actually recognizing the country. So this is another thing that was built in to the resentment that led up to the revolution. So now I'm jumping over like 10 years into 70s. Early 70s is basically what the opposition to the Shah started in 72, 73, that came out right in the open. You have the Iranian college student outside Iran, basically the organizing in various Marxist or Islamist factions. You have a guy named Shariati, which is an intellectual who studied with Jean-Paul Sartre and Frantz Fanon, and he brought in that strain of national liberation into Iranian politics. You have the leftist, obviously, as always, the anti-authoritarian movement, which basically resulted into two factions. One being Mujahideen Khalq Iran, MKO, which started as an anti-Shah movement with a lot of influences from Shariati. And you have Fadaiyan Khalq, which basically they were Maoist group, and these guys organized outside Iran and inside Iran, and the Fadaiyan are actually the ones who made an insurrection that was crushed. But it was the insurrection that basically the whole army was deployed into that area, which is named Siyah Gal.
When was this?
that this is 73, and this is basically they tried to take over the gendarme, sheriff, some
Police.
similar, a
Yeah,
police
military
station,
kind of police.
a rural police force. They tried to take it over, and actually they had a back and forth. They had a war, and a lot of people. It made an impact on the consciousness of the people that we can stand up, even though it was crushed, and all these leaders who were rounded up were shot on the hills. You know, no trial. And from here on, you see the development of a modern Islamic oriented movement, which basically used the mosque network to disseminate propaganda against the Shah. And comes to 1979, you have major demonstration against Shah because of the Shah gives out this similar to what British got in the colonial times, protection of their personnel inside Iran. Shah gives out this capitulation, essentially, capitulation, which basically any American soldier committing any crime would not be tried in Iranian courts and would be tried in American court. And this was basically brought up by Ayatollah Khomeini. This is what makes him a major figure. He stands up while other clergymen are silent. He stands up and essentially says, okay, this is colonialism, and he uses a lot of words that are familiar to the leftists and the Islamists. So this is colonialism, this is imperialism, and there's a famous quote that says, if American soldier, if the Iranian king runs over an American soldier's dog, he needs to be tried in American courts. And it brings out the disparity of power that Shah was willing to submit to. And there's a major demonstration in early '79 that basically results in like a massacre. It is called massacre. It's not known how many people died. Michel Foucault puts it into thousands, but that's exaggeration, obviously.
1962.
1962.
Yeah, the first uprising, 1962, 15,000.
Would you?
Can you speak louder?
Well, you know, you're right, but it wasn't 1979 that started. That was 1979, but the first uprising of Khomeini was 1962 that Shah put down and exiled him, right?
Well, that was an uprising. He made a speech, and essentially he was put under house arrest, and
I remember seeing killing in the streets. 15,000 people were killed.
15,000?
Yes. That was the reason Khomeini became so famous.
Okay.
The Shah wanted to kill him, actually. But they decided not to, because other Grand Ayatollahs elevated him to the Grand Ayatollah. He couldn't kill him because he was Grand Ayatollah. So he was exiled. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm just trying to...
the one that
the dates are important.
the one that I was referring to was actually the Jaled.
Yeah, but that happened during the last revolution.
That's the revolution that 79.
Right.
That's what I was referring to. That's the one I'm saying. Michel Foucault was
right. That was a successful one, right?
Successful one, I say. Okay, the 1970. This is 1979, which basically starts it basically snowballs into the overthrow of the Shah. And in the overthrow of the Shah, it's very important. A lot of people view it as a purely Islamic, Islamist-oriented, Islamist-developed affair, which is actually what is later, it is propaganda of the Islamic Republic, which does not include a lot of factions. The liberals were involved, and the leftists were involved, and then there was this international influence of it. From the Khomeini was exiled in '62 to Iraq, and then he was there until he was in exile in Turkey. Then 6 months before the '79 revolution was successful in February of '79. 6 months before that, he goes to France, and you have all these uprisings, upheavals that are grabbing the Western audience's attention, and they're trying to figure out what it is. And he goes to France, where all the cameras go to, and he becomes the central figure of this development, this latest development. In minds of international community, he becomes the leader. But we have to know that just like any society, any movement, there is no one central figure in opposition. So you have a lot of people like the Bazargan, which try to use his international fame in order to bring down the government, and essentially they would become they hoped that they would become the central, that they would build a Western-style parliamentary republic. And so you have this meeting in France, in Neauphle-la-Château, of various figures of the oppositional movement, with the exclusion of the leftists, liberals, nationalists, and the Islamists essentially coalesce over there, and they put down this unstoppable front against the Shah, to the exclusion of, I say again, the leftists. And from then on, the Shah leaves. There's a conference in Guadeloupe, which basically the Western powers declare that, okay, Shah does not have the capacity to control this, we're not going to support him anymore, and he leaves.
Why did they exclude the leftists?
Why do the liberals and the nationalists always exclude the leftists? That is the good question. Yeah, because of private property. I mean, the Fadayan, I mean, we can get into that in another discussion.
Right.
But that's always the case. But after, okay, Khomeini comes, yes.
Maybe this is the other discussion, but we don't want to be interrupted. But I have a question about the role of the various classes within Iran itself during the period of 1979, and in particular, whether there were any independent organizations of the Iranian working class, for example, among the oil workers, and also what role did the Tudeh party, if any, play? Were they still a significant force in 1979?
Tudeh was there were, just like anywhere else, there's so many different leftist organizations, and they splinter from each other. You have the Tudeh was the oldest one, but by that time, because of the relationship that they had with Soviet Union, and it came into the open, they were not really trusted by the public. They were not. We had the Maoist group that I talked about, Fadayan. They are very small, but they're very inactive. And you have the Mujahideen Khalq, which is essentially a national liberation organization, which basically at this time they were anti-authoritarian, and they were open, and they were very organized. And at this time, still they were trusted by the people. They had significant portion of trust by the upper middle class, educated class. You know, the people who have some opportunities, but at the same time they're in opposition to the Shah. And you have like Tufan, Paykar, and all these are very small organizations. They're not really significant force. But at the same time, Fadayan and the Mujahideen, they were the two ones. Fadayan after the recognizes they want to get into a coalition with the Islamists after the election. So after the election, after the revolution, after Shah leaves and Khomeini comes into power. So you have this split between within the Fadaiyan movement, which is basically majority goes with the Tudeh and supports them. The minority goes in Kurdistan, starts fighting the armed wing of the Islamist movement, which becomes a revolutionary guard, Pastaran. And so
I don't mean to dominate, but I'm wondering, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying from the top, but what's happening at the bottom?
you have the oil workers, you have oil workers striking, but at the same time, this strike, it's a working class strike, but it was not called, like the call for that strike came from the Islamist camp. It did not come from the leftist camp. So it's an industrial action, but industrial action based on religious ideology, not political ideology, not working class oriented ideology. It's not about taking over the means of production. It's about shutting down the economy. You understand?
Yeah. So, for example, there were not workers' councils created during that period. I don't know. I'm not.
There were committees. Like there's this idea, like committee. There was committees created, but again, it was committees oriented towards the committees were dominated by Islamist figures, especially after, and they become kind of like a neighborhood security force. At the beginning, they were neighborhood security force, and this is because essentially there is a war going on, like urban warfare going on between the MKO, Mujahideen Khalq, and then the religious oriented movement. So there is actually, which is actually very interesting, because the MKO they lose that war essentially, and they're driven out. But they, the leadership group. Okay, I give a little history of the MKO. MKO started as an anti-Shah movement, but there is a figure within the movement. His name is Mansour Rajavi. Nobody knows if he's alive or dead. And he basically, while he's in jail, he rats out on his the top committee, the executive committee. And what happens is, like, he turns them over to Savak, so they end up dead, and he becomes a major figure. After the revolution, he's free. The political prisoners are free. He comes out, he's a major figure, and he's the one after that which is basically driving the organization and directing the organization. Mujahideen Khalq, during the war with Iraq, they moved to Iraq, and they basically operate as the fifth column for the Iraqis. They do the interrogations, they become plants in the POW camps.
You're talking about the people from MKO?
MKO, yeah. Okay. And after, obviously after when Saddam invades Kuwait and he's really weakened, they still have it, I think. They have a camp over there, Camp Ashraf, which is basically Saddam. Saddam is just holding on to them in order to have a negotiation chip with the Iranians, and Iranians had supported some Iraqi group which became sad came out of it after the US invaded. And anyways, so after Saddam becomes weaker, these guys move to France. Their leadership is in France. They concentrate on lobbying the Western governments against Iran. They are the ones who actually break the news, which is not really the news for Iranians. We always knew that the nuclear reactor in Bushehr was going to be built and worked on. But they basically bring it up, make it an issue that, okay, Iran is having a nuclear program. And what happens, like, they become very much the lobbying. They become a lobbying group in the United States. They donate, like they donated in 1999 to the Republican campaigns in New York and the Democratic campaign in New York, $1,000 increments, but $30,000 to each candidate in the Manhattan area. So, and they're actually the ones that they get some help from Israel. They get help from Israel. They get anything that goes against current Iranian government, they love it. But okay.
Answer. Well, you were asking about where they were leftists organized at the time of revolution.
Especially at the
Right.
base.
I want to address that directly. I was among a lot of them, so I have some first-hand knowledge. They were all, from Trotskyists to outright communists to the party to Fadayan, even Marxist, MKO portion that became Marxist. They were all coalescing around Khomeini's revolution with the thought that these fanatical mullahs cannot run the country. We will take over later. Okay? So they were all supporting him. They were all supporting the overthrow of the Shah because they were anti-imperialist West and so forth. And Khomeini egged them on and let them believe that's, open democracy. They have a chance to participate. But after he succeeded in the revolution and he strengthened his position, he wiped them all out. That's the bottom line.
Okay. Again, from personal family experience, not all of them supported Khomeini.
Well, of course,
And
but
there was
they
a lot
paid
of
lip
people who
service.
left it. They did not know. There were people who actually took a position. I don't know if you know Bijan Jazani.
Yes.
Very early on, he wrote that the mass base of Iranian working class, the third level that Westerners don't see, are organizing against organizing around Ayatollah Khomeini, and he encouraged all his comrades to take a stand and educate people on it. There is a lot of leftists that are outside Iran that you can talk to, and the reason they're outside Iran is because of the fact that they left.
No doubt about it, but what I'm saying was their tactical decision to get rid of the Shah using Khomeini's movement because they weren't powerful
Some of the
enough
groups
to do.
did that, yes.
Right, and then they had the option of, exerting their own influence in so-called democratic environment. Okay, just trying to just sum up what you're trying to.
Okay. All right. So from here on out, 79. I want to bring in the international, American involvement with, India. Yes.
How long was the conflict? Like after the Shah was deposed, what this internal struggle? How long did that take? And was there a power vacuum?
There was there was a. It's hard to put a date on. I would personally say that after the Shah left, maybe a year and a half. That was this back and forth. But the Khomeini's front was by far the prevailing front. It seems okay.
That the battle was between Khomeini and the coalition?
No, it was it's essentially that you can say it's kind of a comedy of error on the part of the liberals and leftists, because they basically the leftists were not strong. The liberals essentially Bazargan, they wanted to use this figure, but they didn't want to give power to him, obviously. But at the same time, they were more afraid of the left than afraid of the religious front. So you have this 79 revolution in February. Basically, there's Shah is deposed and he's gone, and the leftists want to basically Fadayan. Essentially,
Shah was exiled in the U.S., right?
Shah was flying around because nobody wanted him. He came to U.S. for surgery. When that happened, when he came to U.S., that's when the hostage crisis happened.
But the rest of his family came. The rest of his family was made it easy.
Yeah. But the figure himself came here and talked about. And I'm going to talk about the beginning of the hostage crisis right now. The hostage crisis was essentially a leftist idea. The Fadayan basically stormed the U.S. embassy. They took it in June of '79. But basically, what happened was that we have this guy Mansour Farhang. He's the interim foreign international affairs Wazir the Minister of Foreign Relations. but the interim one. And he goes over there and says, okay, this is not good, you need to like pick up and leave, and the leftists essentially agree, and they leave the occupation of the U.S. Embassy. At that point, the Islamists become in charge of the security of U.S. Embassy. This is very important because the Islamists later on in November, they staged the actual hostage crisis that we know about is that one. But before this, they were in charge of the security of the embassy. So they know how to get in and what to do and the personnel. And when Shah comes to the United States, this happens. And a lot of people, and this is when Carter basically imposes it's actually November 14th, 1979. He blocks travel, and he basically freezes the asset of Iran. But this is enabled by 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which is basically comes out of the American fear of a major international economic situation affecting its policy. And this is because of OPEC oil crisis. OPEC oil crisis was really the thing that at the time captured the imagination of the American policymakers. So because of that, in 1977, they passed this International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and basically it allows the President of the United States to freeze the assets of any country. So you have this, from here on, in 1979, you have series of bipartisan executive orders. You have the executive order in November 14, 1979. You basically executive order of April 7 and 17th of 1980, done by Ronald Reagan, which basically bans commerce and travel to Iran. You have the executive order of January 13, 1984, which basically designates Iran as a country supporting of terrorism. You have these are all executive orders by Reagan now. Executive order October 29, 1987, no goods of Iranian origin imported to US. So basically cutting the trade off. And then you have this executive orders go all the way up to today. Right now you have the sanctions on central bank. So I'm just going to read off most of 1993. You have the Iran-Iraq Arms Proliferation Act, which basically stops any based on American policy. They want to limit the proliferation of arms to Iraq and Iran. But at the same time, you have to remember this is the Clinton time. This is a time that basically the Soviet Union is gone. They try to limit the number of the military capability of the opposing country. It always starts from the military and goes to economics. And you have in 1995 ban on Americans entering into contracts with Iranian government on the energy sector, and during that, this is the time that basically during the Bush senior years, actually they wanted to open the energy sector of Iran. You have the Conoco, which bid for one of the development of a gas field in the Persian Gulf, which Clinton administration basically forbade them to do that during this executive order. And that contract was taken over by the French Total. And in 1996, Clinton signs the Iran-Libya Sanction Act, which basically caps the involvement of American companies to $40 million in Iran, which is nothing in the energy sector. Like $40 million in energy is nothing. In 1996, you have this incident in Khobar in Saudi Arabia, which basically there's an explosion, which we now know it was done by Al-Qaeda. But at that time, it was blamed on Iran. They said that, okay, this is Iranian, because Iran doesn't want the US to be there, so it must have been Iran that did this. Yes.
Who is Al-Hada? The group that you said that did
Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda.
Oh.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia always covers up for that.
And
Because they're involved in it.
so, and then 1998, so you have the okay, going back to Iran now. Not the relationship between Iran and US. Now it's 79 again in Iran, in 80 in Iran, and there's a war. Saddam Hussein declares that makes a declaration that Iran is occupying Arab land. What is to him Arab land, which is actually what he means is the oil-producing region, Khuzestan, and he declares that there is a 3 island that Iran has a dispute over with UAE. These need to be traded off to the given back to the UAE, and he makes this declaration on a pan-Arabist front. Basically, he's standing up. He wants to be the Arab man, and basically there's invasion. And actually, the interesting thing is that the Arab minority, there are Shiites in the southern the Khuzestan. There's a significant minority of Arab Shiites in Iran, in Khuzestan. They are the one who initially resist the Ba'ath army, the Iraqi army, from coming in. And like one of the cities, Khorramshahr, which is right next to the Iraqi border, they basically do the urban warfare against the armed, very well armed Iraqi army. And at this time, Iraq is backed by Soviet Union, and Iran is not obviously backed by US anymore because they did a revolution and they invaded the embassy, so they can't get arms there from them anymore. But you have this religious, religious-inspired movement of the people to go to the front and fight, and initially that's what keeps the Iraqi army from actually coming in and actually doing what Saddam wanted to do. I've been to the region, and you see, like, you still see the Iraqi graffitis that we came here to stay. Like that was, and at this point, okay, the factions within the Iranian government all unite. Iranian government, I have to say this: the Islamic Republican Party was dissolved after there was the complete takeover. So you have no parties anymore. So you have factions, you have fronts. So still in Iran, you don't have a party. You have coalitions. You have societies. Like you have Society of Islamic Engineers who become, like, Ahmadinejad comes out of that. And so you have this frontal politics. And one of the major figures in Iranian politics at this time is Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, and this man is the Iranian capitalist. He's the man who is the beneficiary of this weapons ban on Iran. This man is essentially the guy who is the contact in the Iran-Contra affair. So Iran really needs weapons. Reagan really needs training, like Reagan needs funding for Contras. So this interest, this conflicted, yes.
What were the Contras?
The Nicaragua, they were basically, Contras were
And why did Reagan need money for them?
Because he needed to, there was a ban on supporting the Contras that US Congress passed. And they passed it actually twice. They passed 2 acts of not funding the Contras, and Reagan still wanted to do it. So against this fear-mongering against communism coming from Central America and landing on Rio Grande, basically Sandinistas were they were a freedom movement, essentially. They wanted to run their own country. As Noam Chomsky says, how dare they want to run their own country? And so they had this Contras that they had to go against, get funding, which US Congress was not funding. So what happened was, like, Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani basically was the contact person on the Iranian side to get the weapons. And actually what he did is, with the Iranian money he bought it, but at the same time he sold it at a profit to Iran. So that's what I mean. But he's the Iranian capitalist, Islamic capitalist. So the and what were we? 1989, the war ends. You have the major move to rebuild the economy, and by this time, basically, the solidarity that is required, that is created during the times of crisis, is evaporated. This weapons deal comes out, and that's a major shock to a lot of people. And so this is the beginning of the government, the institutional losing of legitimacy inside Iran. And you have the rise of the like opposition movement, who's essentially not clear. Okay. And 1998. Anybody wants to say something? Okay.
I would ask about the oil deal. You talked about the oil deal that happened, like that 100-year stretch. What happened after the 100-year stretch?
Oh, well, the nationalization of oil took care of that. Like the Iran, Mossadegh was basically nationalized the oil, and that was the reason he was overthrown. But at the same time, the new company, the Iranian oil company, still basically operates with foreign investment. Iran doesn't have a capacity to build its own oil production facilities, and still to this day we are importing more oil. A lot of people say like, why Iran needs the nuclear reactor, nuclear energy? They have oil, but most of them don't know that the development of energy sector is incomplete inside Iran, uneven development within the capitalist system, and you have this, like Iran imports 40% of its gas, like which it uses to run the country basically. So that's an answer. Yes.
I just wanted to add that Anglo-Iranian oil subsequently.
So you're getting lost.
Oh, that the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company subsequently became British Petroleum, which is the company that had the big spill in the Gulf last year.
BP.
So we don't have to feel sorry for them.
Okay. Beginning of the sort of a rapprochement for 2 years. It's 1998, and you have this the major, what is called reformist figure, a liberal Islamist figure, Khatami. He gets elected by 70%. Nobody gave him a chance. Like they said that his opponent is gonna basically win, and he wins with 70% support. And you have the beginning of an openness in Iranian society. You have a lot of books that are basically banned, become very popular. You have newspapers that, because later on they get shut down, but you have this 2-year opening of the system, and so basically this is the time that Iran tries to come closer to US. There's kind of this athlete diplomacy. They're like US sends a wrestling team to Iran for the first time, and you have them getting very warm welcome, and that is like beginning of something, some people think. But at the same time you have increased funding for the Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which basically US steps up its funding for the propaganda radios it uses against the government. So you have this carrot and stick thing going on still. And this time, because it is this time that it's 1995, which basically AIPAC really wants to prevent any real opening of relations between US and Iran. AIPAC, the American-Israeli Public Affairs Council, and they hatched on to this idea. Like Khatami essentially says, if the Palestinians can, if a deal is reached between the Palestinian and Israeli that is favorable towards Palestinians, we have no problem with that. Which essentially says Israel needs to figure out its problem with Palestinians in order for us to back off, essentially. But you have this openness also exhibited in the 2000 year, the year 2000 being declared the year of dialogue between civilization, which is ironically put forth in the United Nations by Iran and United States, but it wasn't taken on. Like, it was very limited, and it was limited to students exchanges being legalized, tourism being legalized. Before this, U.S. has the same approach to Iran as it does to Cuba. Basically, you can't go to Cuba directly. Like, you're not allowed. And this is the time that basically Iranians were expecting that their frozen assets from 1979 would be unfrozen and would be available. But through the use of courts, and this is prevented. So essentially you have this personnel who were taken hostage like 20 years before. They start pressing charges against the Iranian government, and the US courts basically giving them a field to say that, okay, this is the reason we still keep the assets frozen. And then comes Mr. Ahmadinejad into the power, and
why did AIPAC, why was there opposition to this process of liberalization and opening up? AIPAC, you said, was against that.
Well, you have this, Iran is from 79, okay. A major grievance of the revolution was a close relationship between the Shah and the Israelis. So after the revolution, you have all these groups that agree on this one point, and it is like the stance, the Iranian government stance on the Palestine issue. It's not opposed by the majority of the people. You have the certain sectional interest, especially outside U.S., that were the people who left after the revolution, who are basically very much aligned with the Israel lobby. But at the same time, you have it's a secondary issue right now. But at the same time, the 1948 ejection of Palestinians from their land, it's very much recognized as being illegitimate in Iran by a great portion of the population. But at the same time, this Ahmadinejad, he goes to, after his election, the first year of his presidency, he goes to a conference which is titled A World Without Zionism. And it is during this conference that he essentially says that according to Imam, which is Khomeini, according to Imam, we hope for Israel to be wiped off the pages of time, not from the map. But this is taken on and is made in, like, essentially, like, I don't know if anybody knows this. 2 days ago, Netanyahu made a comment about Lebanon. He said that when we're done with them, you would not find Lebanon on the map. It is a rhetorical. I would say actually, like, the Netanyahu's is more aggressive because he refers to the actual map. This was actually an interview in Switzerland with the German newspaper Die Zeit, and it was reported by Pravda. So Pravda might be a little bit iffy. Sometimes they make up stuff, but it seems it is real because it was on all the blogs. So it is a rhetorical stance. It is a rhetorical utterance. But it gets to the basics that Iran doesn't recognize Israel as being legitimately constructed because of the rejection of the Palestinians from their land, and so that's that. Any questions from now? Okay. I think I'm done.
If you're done, I have a question. Why is Rafsanjani considered to be moderate? I mean, there are anecdotes telling me that he is definitely not a moderate, but he's considered to be a moderate. Why is
Because he wants to open up the country for business. He's the person who proposes, had this idea of free trade zones where laws don't, like, you have these free trade areas that laws don't apply. Like, in some countries that are started on an Islamic Republican, like Islamic Republic was essentially propagating the first 15 years. We're for the masses, we're for the downtrodden, we're gonna educate them, and they did a lot of that. But at the same time, right now, there's that tendency that wants to basically go back to the normal business, open up, and so the way they do it is like they don't open the whole country. They open up certain areas, geographical areas. They say the laws, labor laws, environmental laws don't apply over here. Iran doesn't have that much of environmental regulation to begin with, and the labor laws that are enforced are like right now you see some labor activism. Basically, the most successful anti-government tendency right now is actually labor. Again, in Khuzestan area, in Mahshar, they basically went on strike. They demanded $130 pay increase equivalent, which is they demanded that they cannot be fired on the spot. They agreed to that. They did this 2-year labor action, which at the same time, if you look at the liberal action against the government, the Green Movement, they have not been successful to get any of their demands met. But you see the labor basically solidarity, like very, very small in terms of geographical area, but very significant because in Iran, the government, like everywhere else, the government and business are in cahoots. So you have this uneducated people who the liberal elites very much look down upon as being followers, standing up and actually doing very effective anti-management and anti-government. They got the right not to pay taxes. These workers that went on strike, they got the right not to pay taxes. Like, this is the best thing you can do.
That's the last right we're going to win in America.
Yeah, but you see what happens. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of how the Arab Spring has affected the internal political...
break my heart. No, like Arab Spring, like I have to say this, like Arab Spring, when the Arab Spring happened, people were excited. There were demonstrations called the continuation of the Green Movement. They called for demonstration, but this invasion of Libya, like I was on my way to Iran, and then the invasion of Libya happened, and I'm like, damn, nothing is gonna happen because people don't want to get their country invaded. You know, they want to do their history themselves. They want to be active makers of their own history. So when the invasion of Libya happened, when the Libya invasion happened, it was like, no, and it went dead. Like, it basically, the most effective thing the opposition has done is this. The Green Movement and its affiliation called for a boycott of the parliamentary election, which happened on Friday, but their candidates were not even allowed to. It's like basically not being invited to a party and saying, okay, I'm not going. Like, that's the effective action that the action they did in comparison to the labor. That, like, they're not coming up with they're not standing up against the government, the labor. They just want to get their own rights. And so, yeah. Yes.
So, are there any, like with the last teaching we talked about co-ops, were there any co-ops or successful stories about
after the
fighting
revolution,
back?
because in part because of the rationing, they were very effectively we call it ta'awuni, like collectives, cooperatives. And actually Mousavi, who was the presidential candidate who got basically ripped off, in my opinion, he was cheated out of the presidency. He was the man who came up with this coupon system, which is not the coupon system in America, which you get sometimes. Like, it's a rationing system, and it was very effective. And that's why he had a lot of support in the lower classes, even though that is not reported. It's because he actually managed the country during embargoes in the 80s, when both Soviet Union was not supporting Iran because it looked at the religious uprising as backward and feudal, and then the West was actively embargoing it, and it was a wartime. So we had no major like food crisis. We had no major economic crisis, considering the circumstances. Because of his, like, he had a lot of effect on Iranian economy not going completely under. And so there's stuff like that, but you have beginnings of something similar to microcredit, but again, this government, Ahmadinejad, is actually more effectively, more forcefully implementing IMF inspired privatization. They privatize this team that I'm like supporting is a public funded. It used to be, but now it's becoming private. So you have this privatization of every level done in the name of we're helping the people, and you have privatizations, plans for like oil like energy, and I think that's the end of it. If the government privatized the energy because of the history of oil in Iran and what it really means to like as a concept of freedom, it really resonates. I think that would be the end of it if they privatize the energy sector.
So I've read lots of different contradictory things regarding the way the Ahmadinejad and the current regime is focused on alleviating poverty and focused on the lower classes in Iran. So from my understanding was that the lower classes support the current regime because they're taken care of through the subsidies that are offered to the poor.
Subsidies are actually being lifted.
Really?
So what is happening is that this economic model, which is basically the quasi-leftist model of like offering subsidies on staple, on basically a basket of goods and services, and bread and all that, those are being lifted. What is happening is basically government, it's an initial step-by-step plan of eliminating them. You have government that basically gives money directly to the people instead of subsidizing what they would use. So that has inflationary effect, and that has basically, I think it's a first step.
Because that's what happened in Egypt and Tunisia, and that's, I mean, arguably what really fueled people to rise up there because of the lack of basic necessities that were previously offered through the subsidies. So
I think they're doing it very much slowly. So basically, the government, the country doesn't go up in flame, but at the same time, they are moving to the direction of privatization.
So, do you see the green movement taking up the arms of public subsidies and pretty much the lower class plight, and then, I mean, obviously there's no actual.
This is not very monolithic. I mean, you have the people who are actually for privatization. They just don't want to do it. See, what is happening is like when they're breaking up state-owned industry, every little interest section wants to get the piece of it. So there's some people in the green movement who absolutely are for it, but they just don't want those guys to do it because those guys are going to give it to their own people. So, but you have this people who are against it too. Like education is supposed to be free, and public education is, but they're basically trying to introduce fees into the public. Like we have private education that people pay and get their degree, and then you have this public university system that is supposed to be free, and that is under threat.
Obviously, working within the system won't work because they're not allowed to have candidates within, because the Supreme Council is the one who
there's a Guardian Council that basically approves.
So it's the Guardian Council that does the approval of each candidate and if they're allowed to run or not.
Yeah.
So do you see there a likelihood of there being a second Iranian revolution happening anytime soon? Due to the lack of.
I think. Well, I honestly don't think that the Green movement after the election they didn't do a lot of things that they said they're gonna do, like going down to the neighborhoods, talking to the people. It's becoming it's dying down. I'm not gonna say it's completely gone because there is active people, but it would be very right now what is happening is splitting in the right. So you have the supreme leader going against the camp that is represented by Ahmadinejad. So it's that kind. Like you have this technocrat who's mayor of Tehran. He's trying to develop his own basically support network to become president, and he's very likely because the mayor of Tehran has a very good chance of becoming the president of Iran. It's so central. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll ask you this. Question is, well, obviously Ahmadinejad is not pro-America and pro-West, but among the opposition figure, are there people who are kind of fighting for much more warmer relationship with the U.S.?
Yeah.
And who are they? And let's say, just for the example, what's the stance of Mr. Rafsanjani?
Rafsanjani is the figure.
Is he pro-West America?
I don't want to say pro-West,
but warmer relationship with.
Yeah, warmer relationship. You have.
I cannot believe that because you know what he said when he visited Japan about 10 years ago. He visited Hiroshima. Yeah, he said, "Wow, where's the monument commemorating the hatred for U.S. for dropping the nuclear bomb? I'm disappointed I didn't see a monument commemorating the hatred towards U.S." He said that to the Japanese guests, and I read somewhere that he was, yeah.
This is the time that the U.S. was, like the Gulf War was going on, the Persian Gulf War was happening.
It's about 10 years.
At that time, people were saying we should get involved on the American, should we get involved with the Americans or the Iraqis? Like there was this discussion. And then he said, we're not going to get involved with neither of them. America is a paper tiger and they're not going to attack us, but we're not going to get involved with Saddam either. So, yes.
Can you maybe, instead of talking about our relationship with Iran and the EU, Greece, you know, what is Europe and Iran's relationship? Hot, cold, different countries, trade.
Different countries. You have, well, I think the southern, the countries affected by the like Italy, Spain, Portugal. Well, Spain and Italy and Greece, they have a warm relationship, but you have this, the countries closer to US, Germany, France, you have England, obviously, the English are always going to be against us, but you have these countries that are more restrained. You had the British embassy basically ransacked at the beginning of, like at the end of last year. They ransacked, like Iranians as a, there's, I have
compassion,
to say,
people.
They have this tendency, like they invaded the Russian after the Iran was defeated in the Russian war. Russian Tsarist government, they said that all the refugees are after all the refugees coming to Iran are the property of the Tsar. So they need to be sent back, and. So what happened was like Iranians invaded the embassy and just said no, and they actually killed the ambassador. But that's not something great.
But I was just wondering also about, and also the relationship with the banning of any exports, the relationship export with China, the markets of Iran right now.
Well,
are they strong?
China, no, they're not. Nobody. It's a global financial crisis. Nobody's immune. Iran is a little bit more immune because it's not directly tied to the system, actually. So kind of sanctions, they're still affected. Like the Iranian housing market is like as dead as here. But at the same time, China, Russia, they deal with Iran. So Iran is not completely.
Actually, this is related to. It seems to me that the principle of developing imperial rivalry in the world right now is between the United States and China and the United States and Russia, and that NATO is being given the task of taking care
of Russia, while the U.S. is building up in the Pacific to directly address China. And Iran, in a sense, seems to be caught in the middle here. I don't see any particular reason why Iran, even under Ahmadinejad and Khomeini, can't switch their loyalties to the Americans, basically. If the that was sort of the question. Do you think there's anything fundamental that's preventing that sort of realignment?
It's a hard one, but I think for that to happen, there's a faction which is kind of close to Ahmadinejad. His name is Mashai, and that is the faction. If that guy becomes the president, I think there would be a warmer relationship. I don't know if it's going to be opened up completely because of the history of it. It's like, I don't think that 180-degree switches are possible without the change in structure of one of the political actors.
But not a fundamental change in
I don't think
society.
Fundamental.
So do you think that that's part of what's lying behind Obama's current strategy of sanctions and military threats against Iran?
Yeah, I mean, it's either you play with us, with American government, you either have to play with them or you're just completely going to be isolated, try to isolate you.
I guess what that leads to, and I'll stop with this, is does that suggest there's actually a difference in interest between the Israelis on the one hand and the Americans on the, or at least there's not a complete parallel of interests? Or is that not true?
Well, I don't think they have the same interest. They have parallel interests, but there can't be any way. There must be a face-saving way for both sides. Iran is not going to just drop the whatever the West wants, and West is not just going to drop anything on moral ground. Like politics is not that,
right,
unfortunately. But that's the way it is, and I don't think. I think if the Khamenei faction, which actually I think they prevailed in the election, if they remain in power next year, because next year is a presidential campaign, if they can hang on to the power, Iran is going to continue down the same path with you, vis-a-vis US and Israel.
As it is now.
As it is now. If there's going to be a change, I don't see anybody like Hashemi Rafsanjani. He's powerful, but he's beaten down. Like he's really severely, like he lost a bit to become the head of a body to a guy that is essentially dead. You know, he doesn't talk much, he doesn't say much, he's sick. And you know the thing about Ayatollah, they get old. Like they live until like 98, like they don't go away. Yeah.
That goes to my question. What do they do about healthcare in Iran? How do they handle that? Is it socialized?
Healthcare?
Yeah.
Well, there's public hospitals. There's privatized healthcare too. So I would go. Like I have gone to Iran and like got my eye exam and got the checkup and all that because it's cheaper than here, you know. In terms of availability, it goes by the cities. Like it's getting better, but at the same time it is going private way. So I mean, in some ways it's becoming more available, but in some ways it becomes less accessible, you know.
And is homelessness a problem?
Yes.
Homelessness is
in Tehran there is, but not so much in other cities. Tehran is like a very centralized. Iran is very centralized, and everything happens in Tehran to a much greater degree than anywhere else. So if you visit certain neighborhoods like downtown Iran, yeah, and downtown Tehran, you see that. But yeah.
I still don't. Okay, if Iran develops nuclear weapons, I'm still not on board. Do you think that's going to be good or bad for
I say this,
the state of peace in the world?
Okay, I say this. Iran developing nuclear weapons has not been confirmed by any independent body. But at the same time, my personal stance is this: if Israel has it, it puts us at a disadvantage. Iran is far less likely, even if it has it, to have a first strike, to use it in a first strike. You know why? Because Iran stands for the Palestinian rights. I mean, they will not use it at first strike. It is an insurance policy from my perspective. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, it's an insurance policy against the rivals in Pakistan, which actually maybe I should talk about Pakistan too, because Pakistan is essentially a rival in that region of Iran on the Indian and the southeastern border. So I would say that Pakistan is almost imploding, and they have financed groups tied to Al Qaeda. Its name is Jundullah, like basically Army of God, and they're tied to Al Qaeda, and they've done bombing on the southeastern borders. And you have Saudi Arabia, which you have the United States having nuclear weapons right in Turkey. You have Israel, and yeah, I think it's an insurance policy. I look at it as an insurance policy, and if you look at it from the history of nuclear weapons and their development, they actually created they de-escalated. Their existence has de-escalated likelihood of actual war.
Yet the war that will happen is not. It's going to be on a different level.
And that brings another question: why did like you can't expect to have clean wars? Like, you know, like clean wars don't exist. Like the fact that honestly, I have to say this: if Vietnam had nuclear weapon, they would not get bombed 4 times. Like they would not have 4 times amount of bombs dropped on them that was dropped in the whole World War II. Like it's just that's you can say that is the actuality. Like if Vietnam had that, it would not go down the road of complete annihilation. So and. I don't know. Like I don't know if they're really developing. I think Iran is developing the capabilities of doing it. That's why you have this push in the U.S. Congress to even eliminate the capability of Iran to develop. So now you have an active embargo. Like they're pushing for an active embargo on like blockading somebody's port is act of war, essentially. So.
I just had a thought.
I just would be interested in your thoughts on 2 commentators in particular, Akbar Ganji and Ramin, how do you say his name? Jahanbegloo.
Jahanbegloo.
Do you know?
I don't know about the last one, but Akbar Ganji, he was a Revolutionary Guardsman, so he came from the system. He's one of the people who got disillusioned with the system, and that's what he said. And he went on hunger strike. He was mistreated badly. Like he was one of the people who, like, very much beaten down and by the system, by Islamic government. But I've been following him less and less, honestly, because this is because of my politics. It's not because like. The Iranian liberals follow the liberals everywhere. They just come and talk about this idea. Like they don't really try to resonate with the facts on the ground. And like this, not all of them. The tendency, this is how I see the tendency. They are trying to import some stuff without really thinking whether they're good or not. Privatization is one of them. Like they really follow without too much thought, and that is the reason they are not successful in coming into power.
So he's one of those guys?
I've been following him less and less because like it's very nice to talk about like John Locke's idea, but you know, or like talk about abstract idea of equality and rule of law. But when people don't, this is me, when people don't actively use the word capitalism or like class, like class differences, I become kind of like, okay, what's wrong? Like, this is my politics, so I become less interested, especially to follow them, and especially to follow them against a government that I know is gonna like it uses every means possible to hold on to power. Like that faction will do that. And if I'm gonna go on if I'm gonna go and risk something of my own personhood, I wanted to do it based on a coalition that recognizes my ideology too. Like class differences is not talked about in the liberal circles in Iran.
Neoliberalism? Is that ever said?
No, don't break my heart.
Break my heart.
That's too much. Like honestly, that's expecting too much from some of. I don't want to generalize again, but at the same time, the dominant voices in Iranian opposition movement, they don't use these words that relate to people's lives inside Iran. Like privatization is not criticized at all. They just criticize that this guy got it and he's a crony. Yeah, okay, he's a crony, but you're just complaining that your cronies are not getting it. You know what I mean?
This is neoliberalism has a long history from 1947, my year of birth.
No.
So, don't congratulate me.
What's the banking structure like there? Do they have a central bank?
Banking structure is state-owned banks run the industry. There are private banks.
You mentioned existing somewhere. Concept of interest.
Okay, the interest is basically forbidden under Islamic law. So technically there is no interest. What is present, they label it, they have interest obviously, but they just don't call it interest. They call it they call it profit.
That's honest.
They don't call it interest, they call it profit. But anyway, so there is such a thing. The profit, actually the interest is 25% last time I checked, which is actually nice because if you have money, it's nice because you don't lose your money because the inflation is somewhere between 16 to 20%, like not known. The banking structure is developed by Reza Khan from way back to be state-owned. Iran only recently developed a private banking industry, and they're kind of shady. So still, a lot of people do the banking with the state banks. The government employees, they have their accounts with the government, with certain banks. So, yeah. Yes.
I wonder when you said about the green uprising after the election. First of all, as far as I'm concerned, that was another color revolution perpetuated in that area. If it was a genuine followers of Mr. Mossadegh, he is in prison. Also, we haven't seen any demonstration by his followers for his release or support. Why not?
Okay. I can give you some reasons. I'm sure that there is some elements that want to just basically just bypass Mousavi himself, but I don't see it like that because after the election, what happened in Iran was basically you had the intelligence community being very vicious to the prisoners. They raped prisoners regardless of gender. And
look at Egypt.
Can I answer?
Far more.
Can I answer? Can I answer?
I'm comparing to what happened in reality in Arab Spring. People kept on going out.
You think Arab Spring is successful now?
I don't say that. I say people consistently went out, regardless of killings, regardless of racism, regardless of all the tragedies we saw. But not in Iran. How come?
Okay, number one was, Iran was the first in a series of uprising. So whatever happened in Egypt, like I'm sure the people in Egypt looked at what happened in Iran and decided in a strategy of making sure that doesn't happen. What happened in Iran was like they called for demonstrations and they didn't go, the calls that I got and I posted on Facebook and like email to the people I know in Iran is like, yes, it's a demonstration, but it's not for the overthrow, which may have been a wrong strategy. I agree with you right now, but at the time they were talking about peaceful revolution, and we're gonna be non-violent and all these things, which may have been wrong. But what happened was, like, number one, you have this use of technology. Number two, you had this stay within the system mentality of Mousavi himself, of Karoubi himself. I mean, Karoubi was very militant, he got beaten up, but at the same time, he didn't call. But there is another difference, major difference between Islamic Republic and Egypt under Mubarak. Islamic Republic is a multi-headed dragon. Mubarak, Egypt under Mubarak, is essentially a hierarchy. You cut the top. It's essentially the same. Like, it hasn't changed. Military still rules with the help of the Islamic Brotherhood. But it's, I mean, I wish my Egyptian comrades the best of luck. But at the same time, we had a major, we have a multi-interest. Like, most people think that Iran is under Ahmadinejad, which is wrong and stupid, or they think Iran is under Khamenei, which is wrong. Iran has different interests in various parts of the country and various parts of the government. You have the Revolutionary Guard with its own dynamics, like tendencies within. You have the clerics with their own, you have like 4 or 5 different camps within the clerics. Like the late Ayatollah Muntazeri was the absolute opposite of in opposition to Khamenei, and Khamenei was essentially propped up over him. So you have this, and you have this private, like Akbar Rafsanjani. Like, he's not powerful as much as he used to be, but he's still a major power figure in Iran. So,
to sum up my point, in Iran there is a system of government that has components. That's what you're saying, right? So basically, the so-called Green Revolution was a reform or a movement to overthrow the existing system, not individuals. I believe they were both, right? They were both type of people involved in administration, and not necessarily beholden to their so-called leaders, and once they were put away, they fell apart, just like that. Poof, they're gone in there.
Well,
where are they? What are they doing?
Well, I'm not under communication this week. Revolutions are not directed by leaders. Leaders are directed by revolutions. And whenever they, number one, you need this, honestly, in my opinion, the fact that there is a threat of war, and Iran, like, the conservative in Iran try to feed this threat of war, like, regardless of the country, people unite. Because, you know, it's better to hell. It's better to go to hell than go under colonialism. This is like Indonesia's motto, like, against the Dutch colonialism. So that's one thing. But at the same time, it's like when you're not free, when you're not autonomous, when your dignity is not recognized, you won't be quiet. And I think, just not specifically Iran, but the way the governing system, which happens in, like, it's not like Egypt doesn't have a system. Egypt has a system too. This is just different system. Like, different countries have different governing systems. So when there is enough of potential and it becomes synchronized, then we call it a revolution. So up until there is a revolution, you can say, yeah, where are they, but it doesn't mean they're gone. It doesn't mean they have given up. Some people dedicate their life to it.
Well, that's it. Nationalism that doesn't allow any disruption because of foreign friends.
It's not nationalism. It's manipulation of nationalism.
Down the border when they know the wolves are all around waiting to attack. Probably that's the
which is actually, like, there's a theory that when major powers of the world, like I say honestly, like, when you have this possibilities of, when you have the forces of the empire busy, that is the best time to strike. So, but the whole thing is that you don't know where the empire strikes next. So it may be Iran, and it would be opportunity for the other countries to rise up, but at the same time, we don't know what's happening. That's the thing. There's lack of transparency all around in US, in Iran, and that keeps it uncertain. And revolutions happen when there's a uncertainty is certainly going down.
Revolution happens when the critical mass wasn't reached.
Yeah, I can say that. Okay, critical mass wasn't reached, but I say that revolutions happen when the degree of uncertainty goes down.
There's no foreign threats.
Well, Russian revolution happened under a war.
Because of it.
Well,
because they were
so you're saying that because of the foreign threat it happened?
No, they were losing against Germans. They pretty much had to disappear. But we...
The U.S. invaded Russia.
Yeah. Not only the World War